Hi, my name's Alistair Black, and I'm Digital Assessment Manager at SQA. Together with my colleague Neville Hopley, Senior Data Analyst, we're going to talk about Surpass data and APIs. Firstly, a little bit about SQA and Surpass. So SQA stands for Scottish Qualifications Authority. We are Scotland's national awarding body, delivering qualifications and assessment within Scotland, the rest of the UK, and internationally. We've been a Surpass customer for over 20 years now. And actually, if you were at the Surpass conference last year, you would have seen us get our 20-year award with a bottle of bubbly. Now, our instance of Surpass is known as Solar. That's our brand name for it. So within this presentation, if you hear us referring to Surpass and Solar, we mean the same thing. It also gives us a chance to throw in a few solar puns to the presentation, so look out for those. Now, we deliver almost 150,000 assessments annually within Surpass. And these cover a wide range of different vocational subjects, including barbering, hairdressing, cybersecurity, esports, personal finance, streetworks, and many more. So quite a variety of different subjects we're delivering through Surpass. Now within Surpass, there's obviously a huge amount of data, huge rich data that we could make use of. And it could be very valuable to us, but to be honest, within SQA, we've not been great at utilising it thus far. There's obviously multiple different types of data within Surpass: subjects and centres, and users, candidates and items and tests and test forms. And these can all be found in multiple different areas within Surpass: item authoring, test creation, test administration, and reporting. And to grant access to these may require multiple different permissions or setting up different roles by subject or by centre or site-wide. There's also limited export options within Surpass, and CSV format is the usual format you can export in. And we've actually worked with Surpass to build a few custom data exports that they have to run for us and then share with us. So I think you'll agree it's quite a complex landscape of data within Surpass, and it's not always easy to get exactly what you need in the format that you need directly from Surpass. So we started to think about APIs. And Surpass themselves had been pointing us towards using APIs as a way to access data. So the question we asked was, what could we build ourselves? And the two key areas we're wanting to get data on are, firstly, item and assessment performance. So are we delivering valid and reliable assessments on items? And secondly, assessment delivery data. So things like pass rates and resits and test duration. And these are all indicators that we may use to identify potential malpractice in centres delivering our assessments on Surpass. So I engaged with our data and analytics business area, and this is where my colleague Neville comes in. And we've been working over the last 9 months or so together, although to be honest, Neville's been doing a lot of the hard work to work out what Surpass APIs are, what they can do, how they all link together, and how we can use them to get data out. We've also been doing some user engagement, so working out who would use this data. So we've got qualifications managers within SQA who manage a portfolio of qualifications. They'd be very interested in item and assessment performance data. And then we've got a quality assurance staff, so they'd be very interested in the assessment delivery data. And we've also been thinking about how do we disseminate this information. So once we've got it out of Surpass, how do we put it in a format that's easy for them to see and understand? So hopefully that sets the scene of where we've been going with Surpass and data and APIs over the last wee while. And I'm going to hand you over to Neville, who'll take you through some of the detail of how the Surpass APIs work and what we've been able to do to get data out. Over to you, Neville.
Thanks very much, Alistair. So I'm going to be talking about some code we've written for the programming language of R. We've written a package. Our package is called Solar. Yes, it's a bottle of Sol with an R in it. And we're going to talk through how it extracts all the data information from the Surpass API. As Alistair warned, there's going to be a little bit of solar-based fun with puns. We'll start off with, why haven't aliens visited our solar system yet? They looked at the reviews and only 1 star. Okay, that's a level of humor. It's going to get worse from here. So when we looked at all the APIs on offer from Surpass, there was just a tangled mess, it seemed, of lots of different ones connecting to each other in different ways. And after we dug into what each of these APIs might tell us, we then boiled it down to this smaller subset, and actually we focused our attention on the one circle, the analytics result API, the test result API, the test form, and the center API. If we look at the test API, in Scotland we have a qualification called National 5 Maths, and that's different from a test form because that could be an instance of that National 5 Maths exam. So maybe one from 2024, maybe one from 2025. So there was a little bit of understanding the labeling and naming of these APIs before we really got dug into the data. And when we do go into the data, we have to do a variety of different things. We first of all have to fetch the data, and there's an obligatory picture of a dog with a stick. And we wrote some functions, one called fetch filter and fetch href, which we're going to talk through and show how they work. The monthly data cut function I'm not going to talk about, but it does allow us to take monthly cuts of the data. Lots of different ways of fetching things from all the APIs. After we've fetched it, we then have to flatten the data. So it's a function called flatten fetched. And after we've flattened it, we then sometimes have to reshape the data. And there are some lengthen functions. And I'm just going to talk through how they all work. Quick bit of fun. What is the first step in making a solar system? You got to plan it. And that's what we've been trying to do with this code. So for this little bit of example, there's a bit of code at the top. It says we're going to use the fetch filter function. And we're going to go to the analytics result API. And we're going to pull all the assessments that took place on the 1st of April 2025. When we do that, we actually find that there are 805 records, 805 assessments were sat on that particular day. And when we pull the information, we get 805 observations of 3 variables. Now that looks a little bit complex, but if we were to look at it in an Excel spreadsheet, what we're effectively saying is we've got 805 rows and 3 columns. First 2 columns are an ID and reference number, but the third column, the href, where href stands for hyperlink reference, will give us access to more information. And if we pull the information from that href, we'll find a little bit more about each of these 805 assessments. What I first of all need to explain to you is how the data we get from the Surpass APIs, or Solar as we've called it, to RStudio. Well, that first fetch, using fetch filter, you can only get 40 records at one time. So those 805 records were received 40 at a time. And then when we want to go digging into each individual one, we use the fetch href function, and that can only fetch 1 record at a time. So we're going to do 805 repetitions of that function to get at the 805 assessments on that day of interest. So when we use fetch href, it takes a little bit of time. On this particular occasion, 4 minutes to download 805 records. And when we do that, our initial data, which had 3 columns, and now becomes 50 columns. We get lots of extra information about those assessments, and they cover a whole range of different things. I'm just going to draw your attention to test, test form and subject, and section, center, and candidate. But these titles disguise actually the underlying structure. For each of the test, test form, and subject columns, they actually contain a data frame within each of those columns. Now, in the world of Microsoft Excel, that's a little bit like each individual cell of a spreadsheet contains a spreadsheet of its own. So there's a spreadsheet inside a spreadsheet, and we have here a data frame inside the data frame. If we actually look at the sections column of this original download of 50, it's actually got data within data within data within data, about 6 layers of lists within lists, and we're going to have a little look at some of that information in due course. So on first glance, it looks well structured, but there's many layers to this data. So what we use is then use a function called flatten fetched, and we go to a depth of 5. And when we do that, the flattened data, as you can see, expands out to not be 50 columns of data, but 2005 columns. And if we look at those 2005 columns, you can look at test, which previously was just one single test, is now test reference, test name, test ID, test href. Similarly for test form, similarly for subject. It's expanded out all those depths of data which we made reference to earlier. If we look at the sections, which had lists within lists within lists, we have many, many more. We have 6 versions of an ID and names and marks. We go on, some of those items have their own names, and we've now got an indexing system with not just one single number at the end, but sometimes 2 numbers on the end. And it's keeping track of what has come from where, especially when we go up to about 700 column. So we need a way of organizing all this information in a more efficient manner. So what we do is we then use the lengthen function. Now when we lengthen that data frame, which had 2000 columns for 805 rows. And after it's lengthened, we get something with over 15,000 rows, but only 101 columns. And believe me, this is an easier thing to be manipulating. And we need to keep track. We haven't lost any data, we've just reshaped it. And so the field called lengthen ID keeps a track of where these things originally came from. And that lengthen ID can take on a whole variety of different values, up to about 101 different ones in this particular instance. And so we can have numbers like 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, 6 when there's just one red index number. But then we have all the other index numbers, some which you saw on the previous slide. So the data which we end up extracting, it's got many layers, and we just need to get at the data by lengthening and flattening on the way. Okay, I think it's time for a little bit of solar fun. Generating all our electricity from solar power, it's not going to happen overnight. We move on. So all the data currently within solar is very well organized, as pictured by this picture of a Rubik's Cube. But when we fetch it, it's going to come to us in lots of different bits. We have to separately fetch candidate data, test data, subject data, sender data, and then we have to reassemble it back in our studio into a coherent data set. So we're just going to briefly show how that's done. So first of all these separate calls, we get our initial data and we fetch candidate href information and then flatten it. We then do the same with test data. We fetch it and then we flatten it. Subject data, we fetch and flatten, and center data, we fetch and flatten. So that's all looking fair. We have 4 different data sets, and then to reassemble them back into a single entity, we use lots of joining. So we join the candidate data and the test data and the subject data and the center data all to the initial data, and we end up having a data set which we can then manipulate. You may recognize this from Jurassic Park. We have security issues to consider as well. So let's just talk about the information that we're downloading. How is it kept secure? Well, the original information downloaded from Surpass, there are some keys for the API, and they'll look a little bit like these. Now, obviously, the X's are hiding what the real alphanumeric code is, but it's a 32-character long string. And when we've downloaded it, we've also got some functions which then encrypt that data on our servers. So regardless of where the data is, whether it's on Surpass or whether it's on our servers, it's all being kept to the same level of security so that no GDPR issues are compromised. Last bit of solar fun. Dad, can you explain what a solar eclipse is? No, son. Now, this package which I've been talking about is available on GitHub. You can either access it use that QR code, or you can go to that website URL. And fundamentally, all the code is there if you wanted to use it in your organization to access data from the same APIs, and it's fully documented. Go and have a read of that if that's where you're wanting to use R to get data from Surpass APIs. Now, all of that data which we've been able to use. And so I'm just going to show you some snippets of some assessment summary reports. We've been able to download information about the number of marks which each of these assessments are out of, and the pass mark, which in this particular case is 60%. We can drill down to each individual section, how many outcomes, how many items they're in, and because it's a dynamic assessment, the pool from which those 10 items are picked. We can also get a track of how many each of the learning outcomes, how often they've been assessed through the assessments. We've been able to generate some charts of how candidates have done when they're sitting these assessments. We've got individual items analysis. So we've got a couple here, multiple choice question and multiple response. We've got facility values and discrimination values. And this is allowing us to just check on the validity of the questions and how well they're performing. And lastly, we can work out aspects of assessment liability, like Cronbach's alpha, or in this case, Goodman's lambda 4. So we've been able to package all that information so that people who are qualification managers can see how well their assessments are performing. That's all from me. Back to Alistair.
Well, thanks very much, Neville. And just finally, a bit about where we're at just now and what our next steps are. So we're just at the point of rolling out the item and assessment performance data reports. So we'll be taking those and getting user feedback and hopefully adjusting those and improving them. Then we'll be moving on to the assessment delivery data that I mentioned earlier and looking to build a suite of reports for that kind of data as well. And we've also been exploring alongside this other use cases where we think APIs can bring efficiencies. So not just about getting data out of Surpass, but also been looking at updating data and the automating of that using the APIs. So that's a quick summary of where we've been with Surpass and data and APIs. Thanks very much for listening, and hopefully you found it useful.